Hello, I've given you some other videos to talk about phenomenology and hermeneutics, and they can do that better than I can. But I want to talk about initially the problem of absolutism and relativism, um, because both phenomenology and hermeneutics, and they're actually related to each other, um, wind up talking about the beliefs and values of different cultures at different times, as in fact I do in my classes. Um, and while many of the philosophers don't want to be relativistic because there's a problem with relativism, um, there's also a problem with absolutism. The problem with absolutism is how can we know what is the truth, the right set of beliefs and values. Um, you know, I think it's historical fact that our beliefs and our values are shaped by the communities that we grow up in. Um, and I don't think there's any getting around that. And that's in order to understand people of different cultures or to understand different texts. I first encountered the word hermeneutics in interpreting and understanding the Bible, because the fact is it's written in a different time and place from where we're living in, and looks at the world in ways that no modern person really can. And so you have to kind of set aside where you are and first try to understand where it's coming from. Um, but when people first encounter the idea of relativism, it has a kind of superficial attraction to it. Because who am I to say that somebody else is wrong? Well, there's a danger with that, and that is this. Don't you want to be able to say that the Nazis were wrong? If truth, and for that matter, goodness, are relative, then to the community that produces it, then you have no basis, no way of saying that they were wrong. You have no way of arguing that that today's white supremacists are wrong in what they say, that their beliefs are false. And I don't know about you, but I want to be able to say that. Which means that I kind of have to hold that there are some universal truths, that there are some universal values. The trick is how to do that without losing our ability to be self-critical and simply, so to speak, baptize our own views as if somehow we have cornered the market on truth. Now, one way to do that, I suspect, might be to try to draw our circles bigger than we often do. Um, And I think that's part of what Rorty is trying to do in that article on solidarity. Um, Nagami talks about misunderstanding and because the rules of conduct in different communities are different. And he starts off with this quote about the Japanese person visiting in an American home and being offered something to eat. And he, in the background of that is in Japan, in Asia, generally, you don't initially say, yes, I'm hungry. The expectation is, and this is just kind of the cultural norm, is that you decline and then your host kind of pressures you a little bit and then you give in and okay. Well, he responded in the Oriental fashion saying, no, I'm fine. And the American host, because we don't play by that set of rules here, says okay and goes on. Doesn't press him. And he points out at the end that a Japanese would almost never ask a stranger unceremoniously if he was hungry, but would produce something to give him without asking. It's kind of different expectations in different communities. And let's be honest, this is a fact that in different communities there are different social rituals. And it's a challenge to interact with people from a different background sometimes because of this. And he points out language contributes because each language has its own rules. And he talks about, for example, in English we have a word for tree and a word for wood, which of course is what trees are made of, right? But we use trees when it's growing in the ground we call it a tree. When it's shaped into the paneling or the door frame that you can see over my shoulder here, we call that wood. We would not call that a tree. In Japanese, it's the same word. Language is a funny thing. Each language has its own idioms, its own way of saying things. For example, in English, we take a walk. In Spanish, you don't take a walk, you give it. And so, if these cultural differences, these linguistic differences, lead us to actually think different ways, and so we have trouble communicating. Page 299, he talks about the idea of an in-group and an out-group. Um, all groups have their own ways of talking, ways of thinking that work within the group, but outsiders don't fully understand what's going on. Um, think about the use of slang, and how if you don't belong to a certain group, you don't understand what certain expressions actually mean. Um, and how encounters between people in different groups, page 300, what's self-evident in everyday life for members of an in-group may not be self-evident for those of the out-group. I don't experience the same kind of treatment that you sometimes experience in our society. I'm typically not afraid if a police officer approaches me in the same way that I might well be were I black. And so people have things that are obvious from one group's perspective may not be as obvious from a different group's, and so we sometimes don't understand each other, and that can create tension and even conflict. And the Nagami's answer to this is that we need to learn to listen better. That we may not be as different as it first appears. And he uses the analogy of Japanese and English language, and yes, they're different languages, but the fact that you can translate from one to another points to the fact that there are meanings that are universally shared between them. And so it is possible to communicate outside of our own group, but we have to pay attention to the bigger context and draw our circles bigger, basically so that everybody's the in group. If we're going to try to understand one another. One of the things that's happened in the 20th century in philosophy is that it has really become linguistic analysis. And your textbook talks about this in section G, the analytic turn. Um, and Russell is coming back to the idea of truth and says our understanding of truth has to make room in it for error or falsehood. You know, just because somebody believes something doesn't make it true. Beliefs can be false as well as true. And so we have to think about, what do we mean by truth and falsehood? Whatever theory of truth we're going to adopt has to have a place in it for the opposite, falsehood. And truth and falsehood are qualities that ideas have, not material things. They are properties of beliefs. But they depend on the relationship between beliefs and something else, not on something internal to the beliefs. Now he considers the coherence theory, and he raises the question that first of all, there's no reason to suppose that there's only one coherent body of beliefs that's possible. And so he comes back to the correspondence theory, that beliefs are true if they correspond to external facts in some way. Quine, on the other hand, is going to argue for the semantic theory of truth, that it's a relationship between terms that our language picks out, concepts, and what is seen as evidence. Last thing to talk about are the feminist epistemologists. And it seems to me that there is actually two critiques here. One is that, and it's unquestionably a fact, that historically most philosophers have been male, and that lends a bias to their understandings, and that, you know, we need to make a place in philosophy for women's perspectives. Um, I can't talk about that too much. Um, I don't know if the pursuit of knowledge is different based on gender, or for that matter, based on race. Um, never having been of a different gender or ethnicity. Um, she does, the first one, Gross, does point out that relativism really gives you no basis on which to criticize other perspectives, and feminist epistemology wants to make those critiques, and so it really can't simply adopt a a relativist perspective. Um, Rather, I think what she's trying to say is that we want to acknowledge other points of view, um, without giving them equal value. And the uh, in her article, the feminist perspective is something that is in progress rather than something that is fully developed. Um, a feminist philosophy, she says, would, in place of a commitment to truth and objectivity, would accept all perspectives as context specific. It would value a theory according to its effects um, on intersubjective dialogue. Um, it would not separate subject and object, but rather stress continuity between them. Would try to expand the concept of reason to include feminine attributes that that she feels have been left out. Um, Narayan argues, page 315, that oppressed groups, whether women, the poor, or racial minorities, may have an advantage in that they have to operate in two different contexts, their own and those of their oppressors. Whereas dominant groups only have to operate within their own perspective. A feminist epistemology would be non-dualistic, would not contrast reason against emotion, culture against nature, universal against particular. Um, I don't know. I'm going to let you make what you will of that. think about. Is truth different? Is knowledge different for different groups? Or is it universal? And if you know, let me know, because I'm not sure.